So as soon as something isn't pushing you, it's time to train someone else in how to do it, because they too need their own development. And that I'd managed to weave something where your own life and your career aspirations can live in equal harmony. If just one person listens to that and thinks, oh, they had some trouble doing it as well, but they got there, and it understands the tenacity that you need to be an entrepreneur, then job well done, as far as I'm concerned.
Welcome to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up with me, your host, Sam Cooper-Gray. And this week, after last week's interview with an Emma, we've got another interview with an Emma, and that is Emma Warren. And she will be sharing with us her journey as a multi-exited founder, her learns along that journey and what was important to her and what she's taken away, starting a retreat, starting a jewellery business, and she also has her own podcast, which I've been on recently. So join me in welcoming Emma to the podcast today. Emma, welcome to the podcast. And I'm going to kick us off with the big question about adulthood. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into adulthood and what it means to you?
Oh, great question. Good to be here. Thanks, Sam. Well, I was born down in Cornwall and a Navy child, so I spent a lot of my early childhood moving around. So unlike my husband, I don't have friends from when I was 3 that took me through the whole of my sort of teenage years and everything. And then we settled for my secondary education near my nan. And then I ended up doing languages as A-levels, and I'm a qualified accountant. So that's a really, really random way into that, isn't it? So, and I always say to people, what did you want to be when you grew up? And it was Silky from the Magic Faraway Tree when I was tiny. I just wanted to be in that sort of like magic land. So I think there was a thread of creativity through me. I loved writing and that side of things. But then it came to, did I go to university? Did I go and do languages? Did I actually take myself off for a commission into the forces? And I had both of those on the table, and I took a temporary job in the summer holidays between sixth form and university and absolutely loved it, which was in credit control, believe it or not. And through that ended up working for Unigate up in the Fens. And I got a house with the job, which was part of the sandwich students for agriculture universities. So I spent the whole summer with agricultural university students who were there on sandwich, and I was working, and I had a room, and I was qualifying, and they offered me my qualifications starting with A-level as accountancy and then through. So I actually ended up not going to university but qualifying while I was working. So I had this really kind of nomadic existence for the first part of my life, settled, and then went back to kind of moving around again, which I really enjoy. I love being in different places still and seeing different places. I lived in Malta for 3 years when I was a child, and I think like just being completely out of the UK really put a little bit of wanderlust into me, perhaps.
And I think it's very common if you've been brought up in an armed forces family, because you move so often, that actually home is kind of where you happen to be. And I think it does definitely create an ability to just pick up and move, and whether that's psychologically or physically, because I think it's just something we're so used to. I was also a Navy brat, as I would always call it when I was little. So I completely get that. So a bit of a pivot from languages into accountancy and credit control. Tell me a little bit then about your journey from there to what you do now.
Oh, just really interesting. So, just the opportunities that I came across, some of which were sort of came into my path and some of which I sought out, gave me an extraordinary level of experience at a really young age. So one of the advantages of not going to university was that at the age of 22, I'd already been working for 4 years, and I had a lot of experience behind me, because basically I just did any job that was given to me and more. If I could learn something from somebody else, I was off there happy to do it. So I actually ended up being a finance manager by the time I was about 24, 25. I'm working on by this point, I'm working at a company that used to extrude the yellow gas and blue water pipes that you see at the side of the road. So pretty heavy manufacturing. There was also a rubber manufacturing place on site. So I was in a manufacturing arena, very few ladies around me in management positions, but quite a lot of blokes who were happy to mentor if you asked the right questions and were interested. And so I was on the senior management team of this business, got an opportunity to join that, took the opportunity. And my finance director was a really, really go ahead lady named Marianne. And I quite often credit her for giving me ambition to want to do things and believe I could do things. And when she left, I moved into her role as a senior accountant. And I think I'd just about qualified then. And I used to go up to London every weekend for 10 weekends to do my CIMA exams, and then 2 weeks off, and then 2 weeks revision course in London, and sit the exams every 6 months.
Wow.
So that it was, it was pretty sort of full on. I kind of took the thing that I wanted to qualify because I knew I couldn't get on into a lot of the roles that I wanted to without being qualified. And also when you're studying, it does mess up your life. It gives you very little life work balance. So to do it over 2.5 years was painful, but probably a lot less painful in terms of a time span because I was already in that headset. So when I was qualified, I was able to move into the senior management role, and that exposed me to taking budgets to board meetings and the machinations of a big corporate business. It was a company called Victolia. It was really, really big, sort of in its arena. And that taught me a huge amount about how to actually conduct myself in board meetings, because it probably was still quite an old fashioned formal board meeting, and also being prepared and being able to take the figures along. But the thing that I liked was I started understanding the whole business, because I heard all of the other departments presenting and putting forward their cases. And one of the things that I realised is that as an accountant, you have a very privileged position in that you see all of the departments. You're not in any department that's fighting with another department for resources. And so with that understanding, most places at that point, they called accountants in ivory towers, and they never come down on the shop floor and things like that. And I ended up putting in a new system across the business, and that got me access to the shop floor and understanding how everything went. So I was seeing two ends of it: the top level on the board, sort of what are we doing, and then the ground, how does that affect it? And I think that really gave me an insight at a very early age about how the management of change is really important, how the signalling can get distorted from the top to the bottom. And sometimes what the boardroom thinks is happening doesn't actually happen. And also never losing. I was very conscious that sometimes I was sat outside these meetings and you were all wondering what was going on, and sometimes I was in them. And so trying to never lose that what's gone behind the brown door, that when you come out, you are on show and you have an effect on other people. Depending on how you come out of that room, they can all be running and trying to work out who's going to go next and all of that sort of thing. So I think it really instilled in me that sort of, if I can call it, showmanship side of management, where you have to be a leader and you have to not carry the world on your face if there's worrying things going on, because that can actually worry people more than you need to at a particular point in time. So really pivotal time for me. Great general manager, really, really personable guy who just believed in letting people get on with stuff and things. So very lucky. And then I jumped across to work for a PCB manufacturer as finance director. I followed Marianne. She was finance director over there, and then I went into that role. And again, American owned company. So lots of negotiating with them, and also the differences in labour laws and everything else. And, no, we can't just do that here. We can't just decide that we're only going to have half the workforce overnight and things. So that sort of gave me a bit of international bias. And then I was visiting my friend who'd married someone and moved down to Somerset. So we were in East Anglia at this point. And I just loved it. We both loved Somerset, and we kept driving home, as you do, and going, oh, it's so lovely there. We should move there. And then one day we just decided we were going to. So about the age, we got married at 28, and a year or so later we moved down to Somerset. So it was, a big step. And unfortunately, I lost my father 8 weeks before the wedding. And I think that it really brought home to me at quite a pivotal point in my life that sometimes you have to have the bravery to take the big steps that you want to take, because life is not endless. And if you don't jump sometimes, you won't actually ever change. And I knew if we started having children and they started school, we would be nowhere near as flexible as we potentially could be as two people. So we moved down to Somerset. I took a job an hour and a half away from home from where we moved to, because I didn't want to dent my CV. I'd done a really good job on building my CV at this point in time. I was finance director in a tech firm and working for an American company. Took a role down in Barnstable, actually, as a UK plant controller, again, finance and putting in a new system across the business. So there's lots of understanding of the whole business and strategy and change going on in my CV, as well as the finance stuff. Absolutely loved it. It was across France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. So really gave me a key understanding of, at one point I was in a boardroom and there was, the German guy saying he wasn't going to do it. And this sounds very stereotypical and not everybody's like this, but the German guy was saying he wasn't going to do it. The Italian didn't want even to sit in the meeting. And the French lady was just that French bloke was just absolutely lovely, but wanted us to go to lunch. and I was only there for, we were holding the meetings around Europe to make sure that it was fair and stuff. And I was only there for like 6 hours, but I had to appreciate that that's a really, really important part of their culture, and we needed to do it rather than just force it through. So it really kind of gave me a lovely international flavour to my understanding that I didn't have before. But my languages finally came into their own, because I did French and German at A level, so I could muddle my way through, but not very technical. So that was really interesting. And they wanted me to go to the States to do implementations over there, because it was another American owned company. We went over to have a look, and at that point in time I had a phone call from a chap who knew the sales director at where I used to work up in Peterborough, and he rang me up and said, I'm looking for a finance director, a commercial finance director for a Lloyd's Development Capital backed management buyout. And I've been given your name because you used to work with Barry, and he says that you're a good commercial finance director. What do you think? And I was like, oh no, I've only been here 2 years and I've got quite an opportunity. Thanks for thinking of me. And but it's really lovely of you. But I kind of feel like if I jump jobs too quickly. And then he said, there's equity on the table for this role. Okay, I'll come and have a chat. So I went and had a chat, and it was an amazing opportunity. It was kind of a company that he was managing director of, really lovely guy, very talented at what he did. And Lloyd's Development Capital had already approved the backing, and they wanted the finance director was retiring, and they wanted a commercial finance director in, and they offered me the job. And I started, and it was a really lovely traditional manufacturing company. And about 5 years before I started was the first time they let ladies on the shop floor, and not through any sort of discrimination. It was literally that they were gentlemen and they didn't think it was an appropriate place for ladies, which was just so sweet. You know, it's just like, we don't want you being out there, and it's really thing. So as you can imagine, I was quite a culture shock, because I was at that point, I definitely wasn't grey, and I was sort of early 30s and female. So it was quite a culture. Oh, and also, just to really add to the complications, I was asked to implement the new system across the business. That was part of the reason why I was good for the role, which they had already picked and they wanted implemented in 6 months. And this was in a company where, like, there hadn't been a new system for about 15 years, 20
Right.
years. So yeah, so that was a really interesting project and journey into how do you get people to do things when you have no credibility with them whatsoever, because you're new.
And you're just a bit of a shock to them because you're female.
Yes, absolutely. There was nobody else on the board that looked anything like me at that point in time. So yeah, so really, really interesting, phenomenal chairman that we were appointed by LDC and non-exec, and I learned so much from them, just in terms of how to think about things, how to look at the strategy across a longer period rather than working within a quarter. And they were very supportive. And in fact, when we went to them 18 months later and said that we'd identified someone we could sell the business to rather than the 5-year plan that we were working to, they were very, very supportive of it. And we actually exited 8 months later at a really good profitable multiplier for all around, to another American company, and started working for them. But I've now come to the conclusion, doesn't apply for everybody, but for me, that once you have worked for yourself, you're a little bit unemployable in a corporate structure. And so we were shoehorned, and they were really lovely and very supportive, but we were shoehorned into this system where there were numerous divisions across the UK and the US, and there was an understanding of running things that was very US based rather than UK based. And even though we're tiny, we still have territories. And, you know, it doesn't work to have one person doing the whole of the UK for things. So we had some culture issues, and we also had just a very different way of doing things. And I realised that I was in this kind of cycle where you needed to say that, yes, that was a great idea, even if you didn't think it was, because that's what you had to do to get the next thing. So I'd had my first son. At this point, my husband had given up work because I'd just been given operations director running the factory. I'd done ops management as part of my MBA that I'd been doing as well. And I kind of realised when my second son came along that I was really not having any time with them. And having lost dad early, you know, that time with family was really precious to me. And also, I'd kind of got to a point where I wasn't willing to just say what I needed to say to get a promotion, you know, to go to finance director of a bigger division. So I think that probably that pull of home life and that kind of entrepreneurial instinct that had been born in me through the MBO encouraged me to make a jump. So 20 years of manufacturing experience, and then I've just had 20 years of out running my own business. So I left the business. I was supposed to be the one at home doing the childcare for our second son. We bought a precision engineering business, a very small one, wanting to build that up. My husband went to run that. And we just had, I think that I'll do cluster bleep of events that all went on at the same time, where, you know, we'd taken on this business with my old MD, who's a great business partner. My husband got sepsis. I had a really difficult birth with my second son, and it kind of really just banged a whole load of things in. And I realised that a lot of what I'd worked for, I'd put on one side, and I didn't want to lose it. And so, and I think being at home is one of the hardest jobs you can ever do. It's so relentless and just so difficult. And for me, I didn't feel that I was giving my best to that when I wasn't fulfilling the other side of me that I'd worked so hard for. So we had a really lovely lady called Amanda who came and joined us and formed part of the family almost in terms of looking after the boys. So I was very lucky that I started working from home with some great childcare support. And the boys have always had the three of us. And in fact, she retrained and now does the accounts for our businesses still 20 years later. So the boys kind of were really lucky that they had one of the three of us picking us up. And at that point, I determined that running your own business was really, really difficult. But I was allowed to actually, you know, have an afternoon off to go and see their nativity, even if it meant I was working till 1 o'clock the night before. So I think I did manage to break that 9 to 5 sort of mentality that you have, that if you're not working in those hours, you're really not working.
Yeah, I think it's. I think you're right. I think once you've run your own business and been an entrepreneur, I think it makes you almost unemployable. Again, if you love it. So I know some people who've done it and they've side hustled or they've run a business and they're like, do you know what, this isn't for me. I like having the safety of a corporate, and I like the structure. And then almost all the entrepreneurs I know are like, yeah, completely unemployable. I would not operate well in a corporate structure now. Like almost immediately having left, they're like, oh no, I found my thing. So Emma, a whirlwind of a journey around kind of your career. What I will come back to in a minute as well is your little side thing, which you just dropped in, which is whilst getting my MBA. You just dropped that in while we were chatting. It's like, oh, and then I did operations because, you know, I'd done an MBA. But if we focus on, so tell us a little bit about what you do now.
So what I do now, coming at a background of, I left and wanted to help entrepreneurs have some professional support that they couldn't necessarily afford or weren't ready for yet in a full director basis. So Portfolio Directors, the consultancy company that I set up and still do, was all about providing that sort of selective support. I suppose now we'd call it a fractional director. So I ended up non-execing for a few companies. And one of the companies that I non-exec for was a silver jewelry company called Hi Ho. And I now run that business with a business partner. And I've also got a glamping business. So we've got shepherd huts. So we did our long held dream of moving somewhere with some land. We managed to do 15 years ago. And so I have shepherd huts that I rent out, but very think Copper Bath at the foot of the bed, rural idyll. We're on the Blackdown Hills in Somerset. So we're very lucky to live somewhere beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful.
About half an hour from Lyme Regis. So we've got a lovely location. So I do those two businesses. My husband and my son's girlfriend work really hard on the shepherd huts, and I still mentor various people. I love that side of things. I did my chartered director so that I started non-execing as someone who understood the legalities of it and wanted to bring some professionalism into it. And I still love that. So I still love being involved in a business on a sort of part-time basis. And really, I would say bringing all of those threads together. Generally, I kind of call myself like a little Nanny McPhee. I'm generally involved when they're stuck, or, you know, when they think they don't need me. That's probably the best time for me to be there. So I help them with their issues, strategic change management. So those threads that started weaving in early, and then in the last 10, 15 years being involved in the jewelry business and designing and developing the shepherd huts. And I work with the guys I do the business development for the guys who build the shepherd huts. I've found this really creative side of me. I can't draw for toffee. You know, I design jewelry by scribbling or taking photos. I design brochures and websites that how I want them to be by scribbling on a piece of paper, literally a flat pan. But I've found this really creative side of me that harks back to the Emma who loved writing and loved reading. And, you know, I write quite a lot of copy for the things that we do. And just recently started Country Woman's Guide, which is about going out and interviewing entrepreneurs in the workplace, mainly kitchen table entrepreneurs, just to show that although Instagram makes it look all lovely and shiny and six figures in 3 days, the realities of it aren't like that. And I thought, well, if I could go and talk to people and they could share their story and a bit like you, the ups and downs along the way, actually, if just one person listens to that and thinks, Oh, they had some trouble doing it as well, but they got there, and it understands the tenacity that you need to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Then job well done, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, that's kind of me now.
Excellent. And I think very clearly through your entire journey is a thirst for learning and the ability to pivot and take an opportunity. And I think quite a lot of self-awareness. So, you know, this is, if I think about what you were telling me about kind of going through that point in your life where kind of everything seemed to be going wrong, and actually being able to take a step back and then realizing I didn't want to take that much of a step back and leaning back in, takes, you know, that desire to continue learning and to really understand yourself and your family and how it works best for you, I think is really important. So if I take you back to that 18-year-old who was debating between university and going and getting a commission, tell me if she saw you today, what would she recognise in you?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think she'd recognise my love for knowledge, thirst for knowledge. And I was a complete girly swat when I was really young. And then I got to secondary school and it was dangerous to be a girly swat. So I kind of backed away from that a bit. But I have always loved learning. So I think she'd definitely recognise that. She'd recognise the rooted in the country because, you know, of all the places that we went, I always loved going back to our home base. My mum would pick her postings if she didn't like where Dad was going. We went back to near my nan's, so she was very sensible. So that rooted in the country. And what else would she recognise? Yeah, I think probably just the thirst for knowledge and the creativity through writing that I kind of lost for a big pitch. I was a very creative accountant in terms of the fact that I've always looked for innovative ways to solve problems and things. So I don't think I ever lost the creativity, but not so much of the creativity in my role until I stepped out on my own and could build it back in again unknowingly. I don't think I did it deliberately and felt a loss for it. I've just always had this philosophy of trying to do more of the things that I enjoy, and that in order to have a great team, you have to be willing to delegate. So as soon as something isn't pushing you, it's time to train someone else in how to do it, because they too need their own development and you can't always be the hero who does everything. So
I think that's such an amazing reflection, actually, which is once it's not challenging you, teach someone else to do it and then go off and try something new, right? I think that's so true. So if I keep us at your 18-year-old self and she'd recognise that creativity, the desire to learn, if she could see you now, what would she be blown away by?
I think she'd be quite shocked that I've got children, because she certainly thought that they were like things that oh God, that looks awful. So yeah, I think she'd be quite shocked that I've got children. I think she'd be quite shocked that I ended up caring for my mum through the last 6 years of her life. We lost her last year. Not the early part, my husband and I were caring for her, but then she had carers, but she was living here. So I think she'd probably be quite shocked that mum lived well into her 90s. Probably because I lost Dad so young in my head. So I think she'd probably be quite shocked by that. And that I'd managed to weave something where your own life and your career aspirations can live in equal harmony.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is, as you say, when you start working for yourself, that creativity started to come back because you weren't as constrained potentially in the way you ran and managed your life, and it gives you that freedom to actually, whether it's physical or just emotional brain space freedom, to go and think of things that you can do, and brings back something I think which is inherent in us.
100%. And
I've definitely found that.
That's so cool. And she'd 100% be totally shocked that I'm a qualified accountant, because I hated maths at school. I barely scraped through it. How on earth did I end up being an accountant? That would literally blow her mind, I think. She'd be like, you are having a laugh. No way. She hates maths. So
That's brilliant. I love that. Which is funny because you got into it so quickly after being 18. So there was that really early pivot, wasn't there? You've given us lots of decisions that you've made that have had quite a big impact on your life, both, in terms of moving from the Fens back to Somerset, from, taking that opportunity when someone offered it to you when there was equity at play, to, being able to buy that land you've always wanted and putting up the shepherd's hut. What would you say was the best decision you've made so far?
marrying my husband. 100%, 100%. He's been such a rock, such a supporter of me in my career. I literally couldn't do it without him. He's transformed my ability to do. He is so supportive. He's never been in competition with me or anything else like that. He's just been so proud of me, and through that, I've got my two boys who are the other light of my life. So, yeah, I think that would be my biggest 100% glad I did it.
Amazing. What I find really interesting when I do this is I never get the same answer to the questions from the different people, other than that answer to this question. And it is amazing to me how important picking the right partner is. And we don't realise that when we pick them. But it's the only question that we ever get any similarity in the answer, which is actually picking my partner has enabled me to be the best version of me. And it blows me away that is literally the only question we get similar answers to, which is just brilliant because you clearly picked well.
Yeah, and I am a great believer, having I'm a big watcher. I think it's that you understand this if you were a forces background. When you get catapulted into a new school, you stand back and watch the dynamics and how do I fit in here, because you're the newbie more times than perhaps a lot of people are. And so I'm probably a bit of an anthropological watcher, if that's the right word, of what goes on around me. And I think whichever way round it is, if you have one person who has a really strong career in a relationship and someone else who is happy to subsume their career slightly to support that, that's a lot easier than you having two very career driven people, because you always have to make sacrifices along the way to get to where you want to go. And when you're both trying to minimize those sacrifices to get what you need, it can leave a little ground for difficulty. So I always think being really clear about what you both want and then setting your stall out accordingly is good. And I knew early on that Andrew didn't want the big career, although he then did go in and run the precision engineering business for 17 years and we sold it a couple of years ago. So, that's not to say he wasn't doing anything, but if there's ever been a collision, he's always been really happy to help me. So I had a very similar husband who was very happy. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but I got offered a job in Australia and the person interviewing me said, well, what's your husband going to think about this? Which I thought was an interesting question anyway, because they never asked that the other way around. And I said, I don't know, should we ask him? So while we were still in the interview, I sent him a message and said, I got the job in Sydney. And literally 30 seconds later, got a message back, and the guy interviewing said, what does it say? I said, it says, have packed, which airport are we leaving from? That is brilliant.
He was like, okay, so he's fine. I'm like, yeah, he's fine. He'll be all right.
I absolutely love that.
So we talked about the best decision. So what I want to now ask you about is advice. So we get given and give a lot of advice. What's the best piece of advice you got given over your lifetime that you chose not to take? So really good advice, but you just decided to go your own way.
Going to university. That at that point, if you'd done A levels, you went to university, and the advice was to go to university. Yet I was being offered a career opportunity with the chance to leave home at 18, which, we all want to do that, didn't we? Well, then we did anyway. I think not listening to that sort of careers advisor advice of, well, if you get a degree, it'll be very, very well, really stood me in good stead, because had I come out of university at 22, even with an accountancy degree, there's no way I would have been on a senior management team at 24 unless I was extraordinary, whereas I had a 4-year head start on
Yeah.
getting to that position. So yeah, so kind of not being afraid to go against the flow. All of my friends, many of them went to university.
Yeah. And also, you don't have the debt they came out with. You've been
No,
earning and working, and
yeah,
nowadays as well, that's so powerful. In comparison to what we would have paid to go to uni
yes,
versus what it costs now. Actually, that kind of getting out there and learning and still getting qualifications, but doing it a slightly different way, I think is incredibly powerful. It's you
yeah,
know,
absolutely. And particularly with the vocational qualifications that are
yeah,
coming through now, I really think it's very easy as parents to aspire for your children to have degrees because you see that as the gold
yeah,
plate. And yes, certainly there are certain professions that you absolutely need them for, but I think considering vocational qualifications
completely.
for children, even if they're bright, and supporting them through that to get them into a career, engineering particularly. I know some really talented engineers who come through that route from that's been their A-level equivalent and gone through, and it's very much undersold and very much underplayed
Yeah,
about the level of experience they come into work with.
yeah, agree completely. I think it's about what's best for the individual, and we need to get away from is a degree better from vocational. It's about what actually stands you personally in the best stead for what you want to achieve, and I think
Yeah,
that kind of practical stuff is sometimes so much better grounding than going to university, where you kind of get to be an adult without any of the responsibility. It's the bonus of
yeah,
uni, I think.
certainly.
Probably less so now, given the cost. But so we've got to the last question. I'm not sure how we got here, but I've loved listening to your story and your journey. And so the last question is, if you could put one piece of advice into the beginner's guide to being a grown up, out of everything that you've learned during your career in your life, what's the one piece of advice you would put in there for other people to learn from?
I think it's to not be afraid to rewrite the story.
Okay.
So when those opportunities come up and it looks like the edge is a bit scary, it does need you to write the story, be willing to rewrite the story and not just carry on into the next chapter to do that. And I think that's probably my biggest thing is our brain likes to keep us safe and comfortable, and it can very easily persuade us that these big steps and changes are too scary and we shouldn't do them. But you can rewrite your story and you can change things, both in your relationships with people or in your career. You can take changes and you can do it in a targeted and thought through way. I'm not advocating sort of the maverick.
Chaos.
I've done a couple of maverick ones and they are a little bit scary. But I think when you work on a long-term plan that includes your work aspirations and your life aspirations, because I think we can look at those as though they're in two separate buckets. And
Yeah.
I'm doing some retreats down here now that help people put them in the same bucket, because actually, if you have a really big event going on in your life and you try and launch something at the same time, it's just like
Yeah.
burning you out. So we want to play the long game, but not being afraid to say, actually, this isn't working out, let's change it, or this is working out, let's do more of it.
Brilliant. Excellent. I don't think there's any way we can follow that, Emma. So thank you so much for joining us today. I know the listeners will have really benefited from your story and your journey. Oh, and I've just realised I completely forgot one of the questions. So I am going to go back because I forgot to ask you, what's the personal challenge that you would set the listeners?
Oh, personal challenge that I would set them. I think it's to be all you can be. And I choose those words very advisedly. And there is a little bit on the end. It's something I've said to people a lot along the way. Run your own race, run it for you. And, and you know what's enough. So you don't have to look around you and think that you're less than because you look at someone else and they're doing something that you feel isn't, you're not doing. Actually, just doing what stretches you in
Yeah.
your own race is more than enough. And you can feel very, very proud of you for doing that. So I think be all you can be, not what you see around you, just what you want to be. That would be my personal challenge to people.
Brilliant. Amazing. I'm so glad I remember that because that's such a good piece of advice and extra challenge. So thank you. So thank you for your time today. I know the listeners will have learned so much from your journey and that pivot that almost didn't feel like a pivot at 18 from away from languages and university into, you know, credit control, and then just look at the career that it's had and the journey that you've taken both metaphorically and physically. So thank you for sharing your story and your journey with us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam, for chatting to me. It's been amazing.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up. Please do like, follow and subscribe wherever you watch or listen. Next week, we are being joined by Christine Quinn Brown, and part of her story is how she managed to end up in Sweden when she was 16 and in Cologne when she was in her early 20s, while she was supposed to be at university in America. So looking forward to next week. Please do join us. And in the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.